Hello guys and welcome back to FATBOSS TV. Today we're having a look at a boss from the 7.2 PTR. This was tested a little while ago. We're having a look at Goroth from the Tomb of Sargeras.
Yes, this is the first boss in the place, and because it is the first boss, it is relatively simple. He only has a single phase, and the entire fight revolves around the idea that the raid needs to use pillars that erupt from the ground to deal with his different abilities. But do note that this boss is tested on the PTR, meaning that many of its things can change from its visuals to even how most of the mechanics work, so do keep that in mind, and of course we will be putting out a full guide for this boss when it reaches live servers. So let's kick straight into it and look at the most important thing that you'll be dealing with throughout the entire fight, which is the pillars.
So on a timer, the boss will cast Infernal Spike. This will mark the location of several ranged players, causing a pillar just to burst out of the ground. And the idea is that you move away from these pillars as they spawn, otherwise you'll be knocked up into the air and take a load of damage. And it seems that having ranged players stacked up beforehand so that the pillars spawn relatively close together is a good idea. This helps to deal with the boss's shattering star. Goroth will select a player and point an arrow towards them, and after 6 seconds he'll fire a gigantic ball towards them. This ball knockbacks and deals damage to any one hit, and will do huge raid-wide damage once it reaches its final destination. However, the amount of damage that the ball deals is reduced by how many pillars it hits as it travels towards its target. So you want the ball to travel through at least one pillar just to help reduce the incoming damage. However, if you're stacked up beforehand, you can get the ball to hit 2 or even 3 pillars, bringing the damage even lower. However, destroying every single pillar with this ball doesn't always seem to be a great idea, because once the boss reaches full energy, he'll cast Infernal Burning. This again is another 6-second cast, but at the end of it, he'll just do a huge amount of damage to anyone that isn't stood out of line of sight behind a pillar. Any players hit will also be knocked back and receive a very nasty 10-second dot. So if you're not behind the pillar, you're pretty much dead, at least on Heroic, and almost certainly on Mythic you'll be dead. Normal mode, maybe you'll get away with it, but either way, get behind the pillar and don't take the damage.
So as you can see, these pillars are very important. However, all other boss abilities will try to destroy them. One of these is Crashing Comet. This will mark 3 players, and after 4 seconds, a comet will land on top of them, dealing damage to anyone within 10 yards, whilst also destroying any pillars within 10 yards. Anyone targeted by these needs to make sure that they move away from the group, and that of course they don't go anywhere near any other pillars so they don't destroy them. Now the thing that the tank needs to deal with is Burning Armor. This is a dot applied to the tank which will cause them to explode after 6 seconds, dealing damage to anyone within 25 yards whilst applying a debuff called Melted Armor, which increases all damage taken by 100%. When this is applied to the tank, they need to move away from the raid and have the debuff explode, whilst making sure it will not hit any of the pillars, because they'll also be destroyed when the debuff times out. The other tank should taunt Goroth to keep him in position, and this doesn't just help keep everyone in range of the boss, but keeping the boss still is vital in this fight, as he will destroy any nearby pillars by just simply walking near them. This means that you want to move the boss into whatever position that you want at the beginning of the fight, and then just keep him there for the rest of it, as otherwise you'll just risk destroying pillars as you move the boss around. On normal, it appears that you can position the boss pretty much anywhere in the encounter area. However, on Heroic, it seems you need to be a little bit more precise, as the boss gains an ability called Eruption. Now throughout the fight, each corner of the room will be taking turns being coated in fire. This fire damage deals ticking damage to anyone who stands within it, and as it spawns, it will remove any pillars within that quarter of the room that it covers in fire. Because of this, we made sure that our range was spread around the middle of the room, making sure that we had pillars spawn in all 4 sections. That way, when the fire came in, you didn't need to worry if it destroyed 1 or 2 pillars in that quarter, as you'd always have some spare in other quarters of the room. Now, as the boss cannot be near these pillars in the middle of the room, we made sure we tanked him around 20 yards or so out. However, it is possible for the fire to coat that entire side of the room where the melee and the tanks are. This actually never happened to us, but if it did, you'd probably want to move the boss around the edge of the room to a new free area, making sure that he didn't go anywhere near the pillars that were scattered around the center of the room. Another possible way of dealing with this is to tank the boss maybe directly in the middle of the room with ranged players spread around him. This would mean that the boss would never have to move from the fire. However, this will make pillars harder to get to, as they will be spread out around the room rather than clumped up in one single location. In larger raid sizes, you'll most likely get more pillars, so if you are spread out around the boss and using this strategy, it'll probably be a little bit more easier than keeping the boss to one side of the room.
But potentially doing this strategy, you could just have all the pillars spawn in one section, or you have people in other sections that get absolutely none. So until this boss hits live servers, it's a bit of a guess really on how strong this strategy would actually be.
Now, the fire from the fell eruption does come in progressively faster as the fight draws out, leaving you with little room to work with at some points. However, you can always see which area is about to be coated with fire, as the pools around the edge of the room will start bubbling up. So if you do see an area is about to be coated, you want to make sure that ranged players don't stand in that area, otherwise their pillars are just going to be destroyed. And that's actually it. So as you can see, this fight really revolves around at least having a few pillars up to deal with either the infernal burning, so you can hide behind it so the boss doesn't one-shot you, or having a couple up so the shattering star bowling ball can hit a couple of them down so the raid-wide damage isn't too high. But yeah, it's pretty simple, and a lot of it's reactionary play. The boss is always throwing out abilities at you. You've always got to be thinking, oh crap, where am I going to be standing? Am I going to be destroying pillars? Can I get to a pillar in time? That kind of thing. So I do like the fast-pacedness of the boss.
Yeah, there's not really a dull moment.
No.
Which is great with this sort of encounter. And of course, with this encounter and with abilities being on different timers, you also get some pretty rough overlaps. There are certain points where the tank has the burning armor debuff that expires, and then they only have like a second or two to actually get behind a pillar. Which is really, really rough against those tanks that don't have high mobility, and instead you'll probably be forced to either like stack DRs so they can survive the explosion, or perhaps you'll make use of things like, I don't know, Warlock Gate or Life Grip.
Yeah, but the thing is with the pillars as well, is that the line of sight extends like really far away. So as long as there is a pillar between you and the boss, if you can precisely get in that little cone and just be really far away, then you can let it time out while not getting knocked back. But that sounds really, really awkward.
Yeah, I don't think you'll have the space necessarily, because the circle is huge.
It is a big old circle. One really cool overlap that I liked is that when someone got targeted by a shattering star just after all the pillars had been destroyed, so they like, what are we going to do with this bowling ball? But the thing is, like 2 seconds before the ball goes out, new pillars spawn.
So you have to line them up.
So yeah, you want all the ranged players to be stacked in one location, so the ball would hit some of the pillars just as they spawn, which was quite cool. I like that overlap a lot. And this fight on Mythic does look quite interesting. There's a bunch of comets that spawn around the room that you need to soak, otherwise ads spawn, and if they spawn, it's a wipe. So the boss does look like it's going to, once again, have quite a lot of reactionary play, a lot of like thinking about pillars and how to, you know, safeguard against them. So yeah, it looks really good. It's a nice fast-paced boss. It's not too complicated for a first one. So yeah, 10 out of 10. Better than Scorpion.
And on that note, thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this little preview, then please do drop us down a like. And before we do end the video, we'd just like to say a huge thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. You guys are fantastic. We really enjoy mingling with you, with all your suggestions that you give us. You guys are absolutely fantastic. We appreciate it. So thank you all for watching, and we shall see you all next time.